Stock market plummets today. A global panic attack is underway because of coronavirus. We'll work through what's true, what's not, what's exaggerated, and what's for real. Also, the head of the Port Authority here in New York has coronavirus. Governor Cuomo of New York has advice for people. Italy has quarantined people in its north. Biden versus Bernie. Michigan's the big state tomorrow. We got that and much more coming up on the Buck Sexton Show.
A bad flu season is 80,000 dead. We've got about 18,000 dead from influenza this year. We have 100 from corona. Which should you be worried about, influenza or corona? 100 versus 18,000. Right. It's not a trick question. And look, everything that's going on with the New York cleaning the subways and everyone using Clorox wipes and get your flu shot, which should be the other message, that's good. Yeah. That's a good thing. So I have no problem with the behaviors. What I have a problem with is the panic and the fact that businesses are getting destroyed and people's lives are being upended, not by the virus, but by the panic. The panic must stop. And the press, they really somehow need to be held accountable because they are hurting people.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. That's my biggest single takeaway for today. The press is being wildly irresponsible here as we try to figure out what's next with this coronavirus situation. I have to deep dive into this with you today. We'll work through all the angles together. I really still stick to take precautions, take it seriously. Everyone needs to calm down. Or not everybody, but people that are acting like this is the zombie apocalypse. And there really are people that are taking that approach. They think that if they don't get the last mask from their local drugstore or something, that somehow they're not going to be one of those who makes it through this. We have dealt with pandemics before as a species. We will deal with pandemics again. There are some takeaways from all of this. One of my most important ones is perhaps we shouldn't focus so much on science that doesn't really matter and doesn't affect any of our lives. Perhaps there shouldn't be this obsession with climate change and CO2 emissions when we all know that it's just a matter of time. Any given year, millions and millions of people could contract a truly high mortality, virulent pathogen. And then all of a sudden we realize, wow, maybe we should have spent that money on something else. Maybe we could have taken a different approach. And I think hopefully this is one of these moments where we start to think about where we should really put our priority. The Green New Deal, all that stuff, that's a fake religious belief that they won't admit as a religious belief. It has nothing to do with actually saving the world or saving the planet. These people are absurd. Dealing with coronavirus, this is very real. Pandemic disease is very real. And I assure you, if we were to go back and look at the archives of this show, I believe I was asked a question maybe even last summer, what scares you? And I remember this now. I said, well, pandemic disease scares me. That's something that we have to be serious about, and that's where we are now. The Dow down almost, 2,000 points on a plunge today related to fears over this virus, which there's a whole lot that goes into that. Fears over the virus, but also a decision about oil production with OPEC and OPEC Plus. I'll give you some of that storyline as well, just so we're all up to speed on it. But I just wanted to start today by telling you that, the media really cannot resist this opportunity to slowly drag the public through a collective panic attack because it's a lazy way to drive audience, to get clicks, to get viewers, and to hysterically trash Trump all day long. Plus, somehow we are supposed to come away from all of this thinking that confused, corrupt, inept Joe Biden would do so much better, that Joe Biden would be saving us, whereas Trump is leading us into disaster. I mean, this is entirely unserious. This is and it's reckless. It's damaging. It's not just something that I think we should hold them to account for in terms of the politics, but also there are real effects here. I mean, Dr. Drew in that clip was talking about how people's lives are being upended. There are going to be businesses might not recover, some of them, from this. There are places now that they're in their busy season. Huge concerts are being canceled, huge gatherings, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue at South by Southwest in Austin. Say hi to all of our folks down in KLBJ, Austin. Hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue just gone, basically. There's all this additional quarantine from over the weekend that has taken place in northern Italy. About a quarter of all of Italy is now technically under quarantine. It also has one of the oldest populations in the world. I would note that if the Chinese in a country, a very densely packed country of now, do you believe the Chinese numbers? Probably not. Maybe they're just trying to game the system and hope that their economy will not be as badly bruised by this if they downplay the severity of the cases in their own country. That's possible. But if you believe some of the Chinese numbers, that's a huge if. They have been able to turn the curve in the other direction now, so that there are fewer and fewer, not less, fewer and fewer cases of this with each passing day. And if they can do that in a billion plus person, often very densely packed together China, it's certainly possible to get this under control in other places. So the Dow plummeting now has all these people who are prophets of doom. And I find that to be very lazy. You notice I don't come on the radio show and day after day find some way to try to frighten people all the time. There are other shows that really, and they're conservatives, and they do that all the time. The country's going to hell. Everything's terrible. You know, the libs are ruining everything, and any day now we're going to no longer have a constitution. There are real threats. There are real concerns. I think the rise of socialism is something, even with Bernie Sanders not becoming necessarily the Democrat primary opponent, it's something we have to take very seriously in this country and look at why we go to this point, why we would repeat these mistakes made in the past by so many other countries and expand upon these socialist mistakes in our own country, in our own economy. But all that said, I don't show up here every day and tell you that, we're all going to die, or that, the caliphate is going to take over America any day, or there's all kinds of things. Although it is true, and I like to say this, we are all going to die. That's a fact. We're just not all going to die from coronavirus. In fact, very, very few of us, I think, in the overall percentage will succumb to coronavirus. In a sense, this is a reminder in our modern era where we all see life expectancy. We see life expectancy getting higher generally. I know there's been a drop in life expectancy in America for white males because of opioid addiction specifically, and the deaths from it. But overall, if you look at the last 100 years or so, we're living longer and healthier, longer and healthier, longer and healthier. That's our expectation. And we get into this mindset of everything's going to keep getting better, everything's going to keep getting stronger. We've had a stock market now that has been essentially going up for 10 years, and some people would say that it's really a 20-year bull market with a blip in it. One thing that I do love is watching all these different supposed experts in the market and in investing go on TV and tell us things that are either so obvious that they don't really need to be said, or that are so stupid I'm surprised anybody would go on TV to say it. And this is their job, is to tell us about, sometimes the market goes up, sometimes the market goes down. Thanks, Bob. So this is where we are now. Recognizing that markets do come down, recognizing that pandemic disease is real, that there are still challenges even in our incredibly comfortable modern world, especially in the developed world, especially here in America. We are all mortal, and we are having to think about that and face that in a way we haven't in a long time. We have not had a draft for the military in how many decades? We've had a very small percentage of this country that is effectively the warrior class of America. They are our warriors. They go, they choose to fight America's battles at home and abroad. I mean, they choose to be the ones who are defending us, defending the Constitution. We have not had a draft in many decades, and we have not had a mass casualty war along the lines of what we saw in the early to mid 20th century in a very long time as well, right? I mean, you'd have to go back to Vietnam, and that was mass casualties stretched over many years. We have gotten very comfortable. We've gotten, as a country, I think a little bit soft about our expectations of what the future is going to be like and how there's not going to be that much struggle. I mean, this is why you've had in the last couple of years completely contrived, completely made up controversies about Trump working with the Russians, and this, captured the American imagination of the left, of Democrats for sure, and we had to sit through this and fight through this lunacy. But that's really only possible because we weren't fighting a huge war, because we weren't in the midst of a depression or a major recession, because there weren't things that were, keeping us up late at night that were imminent threats to our safety, to our family, to our well-being in the way that other generations have dealt with. So I think our mentality had gotten a little bit soft, as evidenced by all the different things that we spend, the media spends time talking to you about, focusing on, the latest in the transgender, equality movement, or whether women should be able to compete in men's sports, or just think of any issue that's gotten a hyper focus from the media that often we have to engage with on the right, try to refute, try to say, no, that's not a good idea. No, we shouldn't be so. Green New Deal is perhaps the best example of this. I mean, that's just a giant lunacy fest. It makes no sense whatsoever. But we had real time spent on this issue. Yeah, we're going to rebuild every building in the country. We're going to dramatically transform our economy. We forget sometimes that the economy can be a somewhat fragile thing. I mean, there have been empires, there have been great states of the past, nation states where, or in the pre-nation state, pre-Westphalian era, just the hegemon all of a sudden, collapses slowly, then suddenly, right? That's what ends up being the epitaph, is that it took a while and it didn't really, and then all of a sudden, boom, gone. So to talk about moving trillions of dollars around in the healthcare system, or trillions of dollars around because of the Green New Deal, these were only conversations that we could have because everything in this country was seeming to trend in the right direction. Despite, and now really think, now that we have a real crisis at least to deal with, think about all the false crises we've had to deal with in the last 3 years. And this is one of the problems that the media has created, is that, of course, I'm skeptical of any media criticism of Trump's response to coronavirus, because all they do is criticize it. They don't take a step back and call balls and strikes. They don't pick their shots. It's everything Trump does is horrible. Every decision he makes, whether it was stopping the flights in from China. I remember, I've actually got a whole thread of all these different news stories. Experts say this is not a good idea. Experts say, well, now we're talking about experts saying that we should have bigger and bigger lockdowns and don't get on a cruise ship. You're hearing experts say things like that. Don't do it. And you don't need to tell me that, by the way. There are a few things that sound more hellish to me these days than being stuck on a cruise ship for a few weeks in quarantine, stuck in my cruise ship room. I would lose my mind. So I've never been a cruise person. It's not my cup of tea, but especially these days, it's not a particularly good idea. I think we all can understand why. So I sit here and I try to take the most fair-minded, objective assessment of this current situation as I can. And I really do believe that we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And there are people who you have to remember, and this goes back to what I told you last week, they are rooting for failure here. And part of rooting for failure is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if they get people more scared, if they create enough anxiety, then that alone affects decision-making, affects the way people go about their daily lives, business investment, hiring, all these different things, so that the fondest wish, the greatest hope of the Democrats is Trump will go into re-election in the midst of a recession. Some have been open about that. Some have been willing to say that they just want there to be a recession. They don't care how painful that is for Americans and what that really means for us. Many of them are hoping that that's what's going to happen. They're hoping for a recession. Are they hoping for there to be real grounds based on the numbers to say that Trump let coronavirus get out of control here? I'd like to think the answer is no, but unfortunately, I believe there are people who would make that trade-off because they think that Trump is the greatest threat to this country that has ever existed, which is something only crazy people can think, but they do believe it. There are millions and millions of Democrats, of leftists, who have adopted that as their core belief, their core position on all things going on in the country. Trump is the single biggest threat. And so they can't objectively talk about any of this stuff. And that's why the media just just factors into this hysteria and adds to it constantly when you look at where we are right now, you look at the growth in cases in this country. It's going to get worse before it gets better, but it's going to get better, and it's not going to be that bad. I think if that changes, we'll have a conversation about that too. Why can't everyone just be an adult about this in the media? Why can't everyone just put aside how much they hate Trump? I mean, we're going to talk more about Biden later on in the show. Does anyone really think that Joe Biden has great judgment and they'd feel so much better? If you would sleep better at night knowing Joe Biden is president right now instead of Trump, I'd like to know why. I mean, unless Burisma is writing you checks for $80,000 a month to do nothing, I want to know why you think Joe Biden would be better in this role. What evidence is there for it? Joe Biden is a mediocrity who has just done whatever he's had to do his entire career to keep getting elected. That's all he does. That's all he cares about. No leadership, no good judgment, not an intellectual, not even particularly smart, not particularly ethical, not inspiring. But that's what you were supposed to take away from so much of this criticism over Trump doesn't take it seriously to hear what he said in this press conference because Joe Biden would be so much better. That's an unserious position.
They have no plan. They might have a plan in 72 hours, and he can't tell you anything about that plan. And it's like Donald Trump saying on Friday, I don't want that ship to dock because that will just mean that there are more reported numbers of the coronavirus, as if somehow those numbers being reported somewhere is going to change the reality. That's the thing. These people aren't in touch with the reality, the fact that the virus does not care about their stupid politics. The virus does not care about their stupid stunts on the House floor. The virus does not care about their stupid denials or their attacks on the press or on Democrats or on international health organizations. The virus is going to kill Americans regardless of their stupidity, or actually because of their stupidity.
I mean, Joe Scarborough is a moron. And it's really embarrassing that MSNBC gives him the platform that they do. Well, what was that rant even about? Trump is bad, the virus doesn't care, and Americans are going to die because of their own stupidity? Really? I mean, if Americans contract this, it's because they walk around and someone coughs this stuff into the air. How does that have to do with stupidity? Joe Biden is a disgrace and a moron, truly. Sorry, I meant Joe Scarborough is a disgrace and a moron, but actually, since we're on the subject, Joe Biden is as well. So sorry. Whoops. Different Joes, different days. But close enough nonetheless. There's also I can't help but notice a voice that keeps entering the discussion over the Trump administration's response to coronavirus, a voice that wants to be heard, and you might think, why? Well, I think we can all start to come up with some interesting reasons for that. Some reasons like, for example, she wants to be back in the game in some meaningful way. This is Hillary Clinton talking about the Trump administration's response to this. Play clip 8.
It's actually been worse, Fareed, because when he was elected, I did hold out hope that despite all of the rhetoric, the bombast, and everything we heard in the campaign, that the job has a way of encouraging people to grow into it, to accept the awesome responsibilities that one has. But when I heard his inaugural speech, the divisiveness of it, the continuing to set Americans against Americans, the language of carnage in the streets, I knew that he had no intention of trying to be the president for the entire country. He was still very much focused on those who he had brought into his base. And I think as a result, he has made some very serious missteps as president.
Like what? If it weren't for coronavirus, you know what would be happening? We'd be sitting around talking about how Trump is cruising to re-election because the Democrats are a clown show. But now, because people are scared, Democrats not only blame him for, they say, a bad response to coronavirus, then you say, what's the bad response? Trump's words about how it's not going to be that bad, that's not a bad response. But despite that, they use this general feeling of anxiety. They are exploiting it and returning to the old narratives about how Trump has done a bad job as president. Trump has done a bad job because people right now are concerned because the markets are going down, because there's an overall sentiment that we're heading into some pretty rough weeks, perhaps rough months ahead. Instead of trying to help figure out what do we do to make that less bad for the American people, what are Democrats doing? Capitalizing on this. Trump was never a good president. Trump never did a good job. And Hillary, I think it's obvious at this point, does want to be back in the game with the Democrat Party. And I don't know if that means she thinks she's going to be able to pull something off at a brokered convention. That strikes me as less likely than tell me who a better VP candidate is for Joe Biden than Hillary Clinton at this point. And let's look at the reality. Joe Biden is an old guy who has certainly lost a step. That's the kindest way you can put it. Lost a couple steps. That's where we are right now with the Democrat frontrunner, who we'll talk more about what's going to happen tomorrow in Michigan or what the expectations are, but it looks like it's going to be Biden. It looks like Joe Biden's going to be the guy who's in the front of this whole thing. But Hillary Clinton's out there still making her voice heard, still weighing in on this. And it does bring some of us to say, why do we have to hear from her again? Oh, that's right, because she also just has this Hulu documentary that came out, which is really like a hagiography. I mean, it's the most positive pro-Hillary spin on her career in life you could ever imagine, being put out by a digital powerhouse, Hulu. You know, I just, to the whatever conservative billionaires are out there, I do want to ask them, hey guys, you know, the left has Netflix, the left has Facebook, the left has Twitter, the left has Hulu, the left has Amazon. Look at all these places. Can we have like a not left-wing major digital content platform out there? I mean, that's a real player that'll pay $50 to $100 million for a new series, or, you know, to put on a new series or a new show. You know, can we stop losing in the culture fight? That would be really nice, because I see it happening all over again. As CNN and ABC and these different news networks just continue, you know, they continue to serve up news to habituated liberal boomers, but everyone recognizes that they're not as relevant as they used to be. Certainly the movie studios are not as relevant as they used to be. I think it would be really nice if we reached a point where we had just one major content platform. It doesn't have to be right wing. I'm not even that'd be nice, but it doesn't have to be, just one where half the country's view of the world could get a fair shake. That would be really nice. But no, you know, let's just shovel more money to some boring think tanks that are writing papers that nobody ever reads or cares about. Or give more money to an orchestra in some like mid-sized U.S. city somewhere. I mean, this is what the rich conservatives tend to do, instead of trying to start something that could really change perceptions and have an impact. Anyway, that's I know that's a bit of a separate thread from this, but it does bother me. It's like if I were a conservative and I had a few $1 billion, I'd be building the next, essentially Netflix that's not left wing, because half the country would be like, yeah, I actually would like to see stories where there are good guys and bad guys, where you can say good guys and bad guys and not get in trouble. You know, that would be nice, but we're not going to have that. We never learn this lesson. We also don't take care of our people who go out and fight against the crazy libs, and then they get, you know, deplatformed, or they get fired, or whatever it is. And, you know, there's no safety net for them. Where you look at liberals. This, I just told you recently about Yovanovitch, this ambassador to Ukraine, who even knew her name before the whole Ukraine Trump fiasco. And she's got a 7-figure book deal. She Carnegie Institute for Peace. I mean, she's set for life. Anybody else, the State Department wants to try to help the libs take down Trump, guess what? They see that and they say, it's probably a good idea. I'm gonna give this a go. All right, so back to the coronavirus. Oh, I was going to tell you about the Saudi versus Russia oil situation. I mean, here's the basics of it. Saudi Arabia and Russia, you know, Saudi Arabia leads OPEC, and OPEC wanted to have a cut in production. I think it was 500,000 barrels a day, and Russia is like, no, we don't want to do that cut. And so then OPEC went ahead anyway, and or rather, OPEC is upset with the Russians, and they're fighting over whether or not there's going to be. And it looks like the Russians like, no, we're not going to play ball. So you've had a big drop in the oil markets. You've had that also happening. Now the price of oil is going down. That's good in some ways. It depends. I mean, it depends on really what your goal is. It'll help a little bit with the. Okay, here's just. I wanted to give you a more precise description of exactly. Saudi Arabia slashed its export oil prices over the weekend, according to Times, in what's likely to be the start of a price war aimed at Russia, but with potentially devastating repercussions for Russia's ally Venezuela, Saudi Arabia's enemy Iran, and even American oil companies. The effects were quickly felt as the Brent global oil benchmark price collapsed by about $11 a barrel, or 25%, late Sunday in the sharpest decline since at least 1991, and stock market futures fell by about 3%. The Saudi decision to cut prices by nearly 10% was a dramatic move in retaliation for Russia's, this is what I was talking about, Russia's refusal on Friday to join the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in a large production cut as Corona continues to slow the global economy and with it the demand for oil. So that's you got this fight between Saudi and Russia over oil production, and that's now also adding to this. Some people are claiming that that's really what drove the markets down so much today. Are they correct? I mean, the thing about going on TV to make those kinds of perception analyses of the market is it's really tough for anybody to know if you're right or not. So you just get to go on TV and really say whatever you want. Italy is concerning to people right now. Wait, before I get to Italy, this is also a reminder, back to the economy for a second. This is a reminder that there's only so much the federal government and global governments can do, or governments around the globe, to try and help in a situation like this. Cutting the rate, right now is apparently a great time to take out a mortgage. Right now is a great time to do a bunch of different things because the cost of borrowing is so very low. But that's not really the problem. The problem is that people are staying home and not going to things and not using money that they would at businesses and for services and things like that. That's the problem. And nobody who's staying home from a concert, I think they're about to ban Coachella, cancel. About to cancel Coachella. They've already canceled South by Southwest. Sporting events in Italy are canceled. I mean, I can't even keep up with all the different stuff that's being canceled in the U.S. right now. We will talk about what this means for the political season because I think we are going to see some implications for that. But the Fed's tools don't really work here. So that's also a reminder that we have this belief, the government, when things get really bad with the economy or when we get really scared, the government can fix this. Not necessarily. Governments have wanted to fix things in the past when things have gotten really bad, and we just had to take the medicine, take the pain. So this is another moment where we see that there's not some silver bullet, there's not some magic fix that they have waiting on the shelf, that the super geniuses at the Federal Reserve don't just say, okay, let's make the economy great again. It's not really that easy. So pumping more liquidity into the market. There's tons of liquidity already. That's just doing something to do something, which can have the unintended effect of making the federal government seem like it's grasping. It doesn't really have a good answer. So I don't think that that's going to be very helpful. Now, just one other debate that came up over the weekend. We keep calling it coronavirus. That's imprecise. And the actual affliction, this is a little bit like the distinction between HIV and AIDS, right? HIV is the virus, human immunodeficiency virus that causes the autoimmune deficiency syndrome of AIDS. And we have a strain of coronavirus causes COVID-19, which is what they are calling. That's the more official name for this. But to call it coronavirus doesn't really make sense because there's a lot of coronaviruses. And there have been a lot of coronaviruses in the past. And, SARS and MERS and these different outbreaks of upper respiratory infections caused by viruses stretching back now for a couple of decades. We've been seeing this. So there's a movement out there to maybe just come up with a more descriptive, more specific name that people can use in common usage. And I saw people saying that this should maybe be called the Wuhan virus for Wuhan City, the Wuhan city in China where this first showed up. Also happened to be very near the Special Virology Institute in Wuhan, which is the only place where they keep hundreds of live viruses for. Where we are told this is entirely coincidence. It perhaps is entirely coincidence. It's a big coincidence. But the Wuhan virus is something that has been making the rounds. And sure enough, the left jumped on this because virtue signaling is the water in which the left swims, right? Virtue signaling is everything to them. They started immediately. I mean, Chris Hayes at MSNBC, who's just, I don't know, deeply unimpressive guy, gets paid a lot of money to tell libs what they want to hear. But he said that this was racist to call it Wuhan virus. And you're hearing this from people, oh, it's so racist. That's really interesting. And also, is there one of these moments where you get a reminder of how ignorant our media class that pretends to be so knowledgeable about everything all the time, pretend to have the answers, pretend to be smart, pretend to be well-read. Calling it the Wuhan virus is racist. But is it racist to call it Ebola? Because Ebola is named after a river in Central Africa where they first found the disease. Is it racist to call it West Nile virus? Because, the Nile River, that's actually where that came from. Is it racist to call it Zika, which I believe also originated in Africa, named for either a river or a region? Is it racist to call it Lyme disease, literally named for Lyme, Connecticut? Oh, good heavens. Not named after Lyme. Yeah, named after Lyme, Connecticut, which I remember growing up with that. That was a disease that had people really on edge. There were concerns that they couldn't treat it very well, and that we were all getting Lyme disease from ticks from just walking around in the grass. I mean, we all forget this now, but in the 90s, Lyme disease had a lot of people on edge. Less so now. It's still a very serious disease if you get it. But so diseases are named the Spanish flu, which doesn't really come from Spain, but Spain was one of the first places after the First World War that allowed coverage of it in the press, in the media. So it got called the Spanish flu. But again, this is just these are unserious people in the media. They don't know anything. They're not knowledgeable. They don't care to impart real wisdom or expertise to the public. It's all just like, look at me, I'm so great, I'm so smart all the time from these idiots. Calling it Wuhan virus is not racist, and to say that is parading one's own ignorance. But lots of libs over the weekend went into that. Oh, how dare you call it Wuhan virus? Come up with a more creative name like Ebola, named after the river in the Congo region of Africa. Yeah, that's libs for you, folks. Shaking their finger at you, yelling at you, calling you names when really they're just showing how ignorant they are.
The fact that he is not willing to cancel his various rallies suggests that he is willing to place even his most ardent supporters at risk, because we're supposed to stay 6 feet away from other persons in order to mitigate the exchange of those viruses. I think that he is showing, unfortunately, why he is so ill-prepared to guide our country during this time of crisis.
Just blather. Nincompoopery from Democrat Congresswoman Spire here. The 6-foot rule is about people who have the virus. Does anyone really think you're going to be able to spend the next few months staying 6 feet away from all other human beings? Does anyone really think that that's an intelligent, worthwhile thing for anyone at this point to do as a rule? Oh, can't get within 6 feet of you. No human beings within 6 feet. And yet, here we are. But see that the whole premise here, it wasn't really to talk about whether it's safe for Trump at these rallies or to have these rallies. They're just desperate to find something to criticize Trump for. And they're using this moment when everyone right now, we're a little more susceptible, a little more vulnerable to bad faith criticisms of whatever Trump is doing. And so they're trying to capitalize. And notice how at the end she says, Trump is not up for this. Really? Because Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders would be? Bernie Sanders is an imbecile who doesn't understand how the world really works. He's just been, shouting from the same sheet of Marxist music for the last 50 years. Nothing ever changes with this guy, really. And you think he would do a really good job? All of a sudden, the people that are yelling all the time about government health care, well, we'll get into that in a moment.